The glass shattered before anyone understood why. Elena Voss froze behind the reception counter of the Golden Fern restaurant, her fingers still resting on a stack of invoices. Somewhere near the kitchen door, a man in a dark coat was shouting at Dominic Marchetti, and the tone of his voice was not one of business. It was the tone of a man who had already decided what he was going to do. 3 weeks earlier, Elena had no idea this world existed. She had taken the bookkeeping job at the Golden Fern because it paid twice what any other accounting position in the city offered, and because her father had left behind debts that refused to disappear on their own. Her younger brother, Caleb, was still in college, and someone had to keep the lights on at home. The restaurant looked ordinary from the outside. Warm lighting, soft music, a menu written in elegant script. But Elena learned quickly that the real business happened in the back office, where cash moved through ledgers that were never meant to add up honestly. She met Dominic Marchetti on her second day. He walked into the office without knocking, tall, composed, dressed like a man who had never once been late in his life. He glanced at her paperwork, asked 2 sharp questions about a discrepancy in the previous month's numbers, and left without saying goodbye. Elena remembered thinking that he looked more like a surgeon than what people whispered he actually was. Someone precise, someone who measured every movement before making it. The whispers came fast after that. The other staff spoke of him carefully, always in low voices, always checking who was nearby before saying his name. He was the head of an organization that controlled a large piece of the city's underground trade, and the Golden Fern was one of many businesses that existed to make his money look clean. Elena told herself she was only there for the numbers. She told herself she would not get curious about the man behind them. But curiosity, once planted, does not stay quiet for long. Over the following weeks, small moments accumulated between them. He would come into the office to review reports, and instead of leaving right away, he would linger, asking about a chart she had drawn, or a method she used to catch errors other accountants missed. She noticed he never raised his voice at her, even when he was clearly frustrated with someone else in the building. He noticed she never flinched when he walked in, unlike everyone else who seemed to hold their breath around him. One evening, after the restaurant had closed and the last of the staff had gone home, Elena stayed late to finish a report. She heard footsteps in the hallway and expected the night guard, but it was Dominic instead, still in his suit, tie loosened, looking more tired than she had ever seen him. "You should not be here this late," he said. "Neither should you," she replied, before she could stop herself. For a moment he looked almost amused. Then he sat down across from her, in the chair usually reserved for nervous employees waiting to explain missing funds, and asked her about herself. Not about the numbers, not about the business, about her, where she grew up, why she took this job, what she wanted for her life once the debts were paid. Elena answered honestly, surprising herself with how easy it was to talk to him. That conversation became the first of many. She learned, in fragments, that Dominic had inherited his position at a young age, after his father was killed in a conflict with a rival family, the Ricci's. He had spent his entire adult life proving to older, harder men that he deserved the seat he now held, even though he had never wanted it in the first place. Elena began to see him differently, not as the frightening name whispered in hallways, but as a man carrying a weight he had never chosen to carry. Still, she reminded herself constantly that this was not her world. She was simply passing through it, doing a job, earning enough to fix her family's situation, and then she would leave. She repeated this to herself every night on the drive home, as if saying it enough times would make it true. But the city she worked in was changing, and not for the better. The Ricci family, once quiet and content with their existing territory, had grown hungry again. Elena began overhearing conversations she was never meant to hear, hushed exchanges between Dominic's men about shipments being intercepted, about warnings being sent, about meetings that ended without resolution. The atmosphere inside the Golden Fern shifted. Where there had once been a kind of controlled calm, now there was tension stretched so tight it seemed ready to snap. Elena noticed the change in Dominic most of all. He grew quieter, more guarded, spending long hours locked in his office with men she had never seen before. When she brought him reports, he barely looked at them. His mind was clearly somewhere else, somewhere far more dangerous than spreadsheets and numbers. One afternoon, she gathered enough courage to ask him directly. "Something is wrong," she said, standing in the doorway of his office. "You do not have to tell me what, but I can see it." He looked up at her, and for a brief second, something in his expression softened. Then it hardened again, the way a door closes when someone remembers they left it open by mistake. "It is nothing you need to worry about," he said. "Focus on the numbers, Elena. That is what I need from you." The dismissal stung more than she expected. She returned to her desk and told herself it was for the best. Whatever was happening between the families was not her business, and getting involved, even emotionally, would only bring her closer to danger she had no reason to face. But that night, walking to her car through the restaurant's back alley, she saw something that made her stop. Two unfamiliar men were standing near the delivery entrance, speaking in low voices, glancing toward the building every few seconds. They were not part of the regular staff, and they were not dressed like customers. Elena ducked behind a parked car and listened, her heart pounding against her ribs. She caught only fragments: a date, a location, the word meeting, spoken with a strange emphasis that made it sound less like a business term and more like a countdown. Then the men turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness of the alley as quickly as they had appeared. Elena sat in her car for several minutes before she trusted herself to drive. The next morning, she tried again to warn Dominic, choosing her words carefully, so as not to reveal exactly what she had overheard. She told him she had seen unfamiliar men near the restaurant the night before, that something about their presence felt wrong. Dominic listened, but his response was brief. "We have security handling matters like that," he said. "You do not need to concern yourself with it." Elena wanted to push further, to explain that this felt different. That instinct was telling her something was building toward a moment neither of them could take back. But his tone left no room for further conversation, and she retreated to her desk, frustration and worry knotting together in her chest. Over the following days, the tension inside the Golden Fern only deepened. Dominic's most trusted men, a stern woman named Grace who managed his schedule, and a quiet, watchful man named Marcus who seemed to appear wherever Dominic went, both began moving with a kind of urgency Elena had never seen from them before. Doors that were usually left open stayed closed. Conversations stopped the moment she entered a room. Elena began to feel like an outsider all over again, the way she had on her very first day. Except now, the feeling carried a weight of fear beneath it, a sense that whatever was coming would not stay confined to whispered conversations in back offices. It would arrive in a moment none of them could predict, and when it did, there would be no time to prepare. She thought about quitting. She thought about it seriously, turning the idea over in her mind during the long drive home each night. She had a brother to protect, a future to build, and none of it required her to remain in a place where danger seemed to be gathering like clouds before a storm. But every time she pictured herself walking away, she thought of Dominic, sitting alone in that office, carrying a burden that seemed to grow heavier by the day, and something in her refused to leave. She told herself it was simple loyalty, the kind any employee might feel toward someone who had shown her unexpected kindness. She told herself it had nothing to do with the quiet moments they had shared, the late-night conversations, the way his guarded eyes had softened, just slightly, whenever he spoke to her. She told herself many things during that final week, and none of them prepared her for what was coming. Because 2 nights later, on a Thursday evening that started like any other, Dominic Marchetti received a message summoning him to a meeting meant to resolve the growing conflict between his family and the Ricci's once and for all. It was billed as an act of peace, a chance for both sides to lay down their grievances and agree to a new balance. Elena, who had no reason to be present at such a meeting, found herself there anyway, delivering a folder of financial documents Dominic had requested at the last minute. She walked into the private dining room at the back of the Golden Fern, expecting nothing more than a brief exchange of paperwork. She had no way of knowing that the peace being promised that night was never meant to be kept. She had no way of knowing that within minutes, everything about her carefully ordinary life would change forever, and that the choice she was about to make, in a single unthinking heartbeat, would tie her to Dominic Marchetti in a way neither of them could undo. The folder was still in her hands when the first sign of danger appeared, a flicker of movement near the kitchen door, a man who did not belong stepping into the room with a purpose that had nothing to do with peace. And Elena, without knowing exactly why, took a step forward instead of back. The man in the dark coat moved fast, faster than anyone in the room seemed ready for. Elena's mind registered the details in fragments. The way his hand slipped inside his jacket, The way Marcus, standing near the far wall, shifted his weight, but was too far away to close the distance in time. The way Dominic, seated at the head of the table, had not yet looked up from the papers in front of him. There was no time to think. There was no time to calculate risk or consequence or the dozens of reasons she had no business being anywhere near this room. Her body moved before her mind caught up, closing the gap between herself and Dominic in 3 quick steps, placing herself directly in the path of whatever was about to happen. The sound that followed was sharp and final, a single crack that seemed to swallow every other noise in the room. Elena felt a force slam into her side, hot and sudden, spinning her sideways before her legs gave out beneath her. She heard shouting, distant and muffled, as though the world had been dropped underwater. She saw the ceiling tilt above her, white and blurred, and then she saw Dominic's face, closer than it had ever been, his expression stripped of the composure she had come to associate with him. Elena. His voice cracked on her name. Elena, stay with me. She wanted to answer him, but the words would not form. Pain radiated outward from her side, in waves that stole her breath, and the edges of her vision began to darken, folding inward, like a photograph curling in flame. She felt hands pressing against her, applying pressure, heard Grace shouting orders into a phone, heard Marcus's voice, low and urgent, coordinating something she could no longer follow. The last thing she registered clearly was Dominic's hand gripping hers, holding on as though letting go might mean losing her entirely. Then everything went dark. In the chaos that followed, the room transformed from a place of failed diplomacy into a scene of controlled emergency. The man responsible for the attack was subdued within seconds, Marcus and 2 other men moving with a speed and precision that spoke of years of preparation for exactly this kind of moment. But their success came a fraction too late to prevent what had already happened. Dominic barely registered any of it. His entire focus had narrowed to the woman injured in his arms, a woman who had no reason to be in that room, no reason to place herself between him and harm meant to end his life. He had spent years building walls around himself, convincing everyone around him, and eventually himself, that he felt nothing beyond the calculations required to survive in his world. Those walls cracked in an instant, shattered by the sight of Elena needing help beneath them. "Get the car," he said, his voice low and dangerous in a way none of his men had heard before. "Now." They moved her carefully, Marcus and another guard lifting her with practiced efficiency, while Grace cleared a path through the restaurant's back entrance. Dominic refused to let go of her hand the entire way, walking alongside the stretcher, his usually unreadable face now open with a fear he made no attempt to hide. The drive to the private medical facility his organization used for situations exactly like this one felt endless. Elena drifted in and out of consciousness, catching fragments of Dominic's voice speaking to her in a tone she had never heard from him before, urgent and pleading, nothing like the calm authority he carried everywhere else. "You should not have done that," he said at one point, his grip tightening around her hand. "Why would you do that?" She could not answer him. She was not even certain she was truly hearing him, or whether her mind was constructing the memory from instinct and pain. But somewhere beneath the darkness pulling her under, she registered the sound of his voice as an anchor, something to hold on to even as everything else slipped away. At the medical facility, a team of doctors who asked no questions and demanded no explanations moved with practiced urgency, taking Elena into a treatment room while Dominic was forced to remain outside, pacing a hallway that suddenly felt far too small for the storm building inside him. Grace found him there an hour later, still standing in the same spot, his jacket removed, his expression hollow with worry. "You should sit down," she said gently. "The doctors say she has a good chance, if the treatment goes as expected." Dominic did not sit down. He continued pacing, his mind replaying the moment over and over, the flicker of movement near the kitchen door, the second he had failed to notice in time, the instant Elena stepped between him and a danger she had no obligation to face. He thought of every conversation they had shared over the past weeks, every late evening she had stayed behind to talk with him, every small kindness she had shown him without ever asking for anything in return. He thought of how many times he had dismissed her warnings, brushing aside her instincts as unnecessary worry, when in truth, she had understood the danger building around them more clearly than most of his own men. "This should not have happened," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. She has nothing to do with any of this. Grace said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would ease the weight settling over him. Meanwhile, word of the failed attempt on Dominic's life spread quickly through both organizations. The Ricci's had gambled on ending the conflict in a single decisive stroke, hoping to remove Dominic during what was supposed to be a peaceful negotiation. Their plan had failed, but the fallout from that failure would not stay contained. Dominic's men, angered by the betrayal and the harm done to someone they had come to see as one of their own, began preparing for a response, though Dominic himself remained too consumed by worry to focus on strategy. Hours passed before a doctor finally emerged from the treatment room, her expression carefully calm in the way medical professionals learn to carry themselves during uncertain moments. "She is stable," the doctor said. "The procedure went well. The next day will tell us more, but her condition is no longer critical." Dominic exhaled a breath he had not realized he was holding, his shoulders sagging with a relief so intense it nearly buckled his knees. "Can I see her? She is not conscious yet, and she needs rest. But yes, you may sit with her." He entered the recovery room quietly, finding Elena pale against white sheets, a monitor beeping steadily beside her bed. The sight of her, so still and fragile, was almost harder to bear than the chaos of the earlier attack itself. He pulled a chair beside her bed and sat down, taking her hand carefully in his own. "I do not know why you did what you did," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "But I intend to find out." Over the following days, Dominic barely left her side. His advisors urged him to return to the organization's affairs, reminding him that the Ricci's failed attempt would likely provoke further tension, and that his absence during such a critical time carried its own risks. He listened to their concerns, issued instructions when necessary, but always returned to the small recovery room where Elena remained resting, her body slowly healing from what she had endured on his behalf. Marcus, ever loyal and quietly observant, noticed the shift in his employer more than anyone else. He had worked alongside Dominic for years, through conflicts and losses, and the constant pressure of maintaining control over a difficult world. He had never once seen him this affected by anything. "You care for her," Marcus said one evening, finding Dominic in the hallway outside Elena's room, staring through the small window in the door. Dominic did not deny it. "She placed herself in harm's way for me, Marcus. She had every reason to step back. Instead, she chose to step forward." "Some people are simply built that way," Marcus said, "loyal, even when loyalty is not required of them." Dominic considered this for a long moment. "I need to understand why." On the third day, Elena's eyes finally opened. The room around her was unfamiliar, softly lit, quiet, except for the steady beeping of a monitor beside her bed. Discomfort still lingered in her side, dulled by medication but present enough to remind her that whatever had happened was real. She turned her head slightly, and found Dominic seated beside her, his eyes tired with exhaustion, his usually composed appearance replaced by something rawer, more human. "Elena," her name left his lips like a question and a relief all at once. "How long?" she managed, her voice hoarse and unfamiliar to her own ears. 3 days, he said. "You have been resting for 3 days." She tried to process this, her mind slowly piecing together fragments of memory, the sharp sound, the force against her side, the ceiling tilting above her as her legs gave way. She remembered his voice, calling her name, holding onto her hand as though refusing to let go could somehow keep her tethered to the world. "Why?" he asked, leaning forward, his expression a mixture of gratitude and something closer to disbelief. "Why would you do that? You had no reason to protect me." Elena considered the question carefully, even through the fog of medication clouding her thoughts. She thought about the weeks they had spent together, the late conversations, the moments when he had let his guard down just enough for her to glimpse the man beneath the reputation. She thought about the instinct that had driven her forward in that final moment, an instinct she still did not fully understand herself. "I do not know," she admitted finally. "I just knew I could not let it happen." Dominic studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes, a decision forming that would shape everything that followed. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "I do not know how to repay something like that, but I intend to try." Elena managed a small, tired smile. "You could start by telling me what actually happened in that room." And so, sitting beside her hospital bed, Dominic began to explain, piece by piece, the conflict that had brought them to this moment, the history between his family and the Ricci's, the failed peace negotiation that had nearly cost him his life, and the debt he now felt he owed to a woman who had chosen, in a single unthinking heartbeat, to place herself between him and danger she had no obligation to face. Neither of them yet understood how deeply that single choice would reshape both of their futures. As the days passed, Elena's strength slowly returned. She was moved from the private recovery room to a quieter space with a window overlooking a small garden, and each morning brought small improvements, a little more color in her cheeks, a little more steadiness in her voice. Dominic visited every day, sometimes staying for hours, sometimes only for a few quiet minutes between meetings he could no longer avoid. Their conversations during this time took on a different quality than before. Gone was the careful distance they had once maintained, replaced by something more open, more honest. Elena asked him questions she never would have dared ask before the shooting, about his father, about the weight of the position he had inherited, about whether he had ever wanted a different life for himself. There were times, he admitted one afternoon, sitting in the chair beside her bed while sunlight filtered through the window, when I imagined walking away from all of it, starting over somewhere no one knew my name. So why didn't you? Because the people who depend on me would have been left vulnerable. Because walking away is not as simple as it sounds when so many lives are tied to the decisions you make. He paused, looking at her carefully. But I think about it more now than I used to. Elena did not ask what had changed his thinking. She suspected she already knew. Caleb, Elena's younger brother, visited during this time as well, arriving at the facility with a mixture of worry and confusion written across his face. He had been told only that his sister had been injured in an accident, a story Dominic's organization had carefully constructed to protect her from further danger. Elena maintained the lie during his visits, unwilling to expose her brother to the truth of the world she had unexpectedly become entangled in. Dominic, watching from a respectful distance during one such visit, felt a fresh wave of guilt settle over him. Elena was protecting her family from the consequences of a world she had only ever intended to work adjacent to, never truly become part of. And yet here she was, recovering from an injury sustained, defending a man whose life was built entirely around danger she had tried to avoid. "I want to make sure you and your brother are protected," Dominic said to her one evening, after Caleb had left for the night. "Whatever happens between our families going forward, you should not have to live in fear because of what happened in that room." "And what is happening between the families?" Elena asked. "You mentioned retaliation. Is it over?" Dominic's expression darkened slightly. "It is not over. The Ricci's will not simply accept failure and walk away, but I have taken steps to ensure they understand the cost of what they attempted." Elena studied him carefully. "What kind of steps?" "The kind that will make them think carefully before attempting something like this again," he said, his tone leaving no room for further detail. "You do not need to concern yourself with the specifics. What matters is that you and your brother remain safe." She wanted to press further, but something in his expression told her this was a boundary he was not prepared to cross, even with her. She let the matter rest, focusing instead on the slow, steady process of healing, both physical and otherwise. As her strength continued to return, Elena found herself thinking more and more about what would come next. She could not return to her old position at the Golden Fern as though nothing had happened, not after everything she now knew, not after the bond that had formed between herself and Dominic during these long days of recovery. But she also could not imagine simply walking away, disappearing back into the ordinary life she had once planned for herself, as though the past several weeks had never occurred. Dominic, for his part, was wrestling with his own uncertainty. He had spent years building emotional distance between himself and everyone around him, a survival mechanism necessary for someone in his position. Elena had breached that distance without even trying, simply by being unafraid, by treating him like a person rather than a reputation, and by making a choice in a single desperate moment that revealed more about her character than months of careful conversation ever could have. He found himself, more than once, imagining a future that included her, and then quickly dismissing the thought as impossible, dangerous, unfair to ask of someone who had already sacrificed so much. But some thoughts, once formed, refused to disappear quietly. On the 7th day of her recovery, As Elena prepared to be discharged from the facility, Dominic arrived earlier than usual, dressed not in his typical formal attire, but in something simpler, more casual, as though he had made a deliberate choice to appear less like the man the city feared, and more like the man he might have been under different circumstances. "I have been thinking," he said, sitting beside her bed while she gathered the few belongings that had accumulated during her stay, "about what comes next." "So have I," Elena admitted. "I cannot ask you to return to the Golden Fern, as though nothing has changed. Not after what you did, and not after what it has revealed about the danger surrounding that world." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "But I also do not wish for this to be the last conversation we have." Elena looked up at him, searching his face for the meaning behind his words. "What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting that perhaps there is a version of this arrangement that allows you to remain safe, and still allows us to remain connected, in whatever way makes sense for both of us." He met her eyes directly. "I am not skilled at conversations like this one. I have spent too many years avoiding them entirely." A small, genuine smile crossed Elena's face, the first real smile he had seen from her since the shooting. "Neither am I, if I am honest, but I think we should try anyway." It was not a resolution, not yet, not a clear answer to the question still hanging between them about danger and safety, and the vastly different worlds they had come from. But it was a beginning, a quiet acknowledgement that whatever had formed between them during those long days in the recovery room was not something either of them was willing to simply let go. As Elena was finally discharged, stepping outside into fresh air for the first time in over a week, she felt the weight of everything that had happened settle over her, the danger, the fear, the strange and unexpected bond that had grown from a single split-second decision. She did not yet know what the future held, whether the conflict with the Ricci's would flare up again, whether the fragile connection between herself and Dominic could survive the pressures of the world he lived in. But she knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that she would face whatever came next. 2 weeks after leaving the medical facility, Elena moved into a quiet townhouse, arranged by Dominic's organization, far from the Golden Fern, and far from anyone who might recognize her from the restaurant. The location was meant to keep her safe while the situation with the Ricci's remained unresolved, though Elena suspected it also gave Dominic a reason to see her more often, under the guise of checking on her well-being. She did not mind the arrangement. If anything, she found herself looking forward to his visits more than she was willing to admit, even to herself. Caleb had accepted the story of her recovery from an accident, though he remained puzzled by the sudden change in her living situation and the unfamiliar man who occasionally appeared at odd hours to check on his sister. Elena deflected his questions as best she could, promising to explain everything once matters settled, though she was not entirely certain that day would ever come. Dominic, meanwhile, was navigating a far more complicated set of challenges. The failed attempt on his life had exposed weaknesses within his organization that he could no longer ignore. Some of his own men, sensing an opportunity in the chaos, had begun quietly questioning whether he was still fit to lead, whether the incident at the Golden Fern proved he had grown careless, distracted by matters that had nothing to do with the responsibilities of his position. Marcus brought these concerns to him directly, understanding that honesty, even uncomfortable honesty, was more valuable to Dominic than flattery. "There are people who believe your judgment has been compromised," Marcus said, standing in Dominic's office one evening as rain streaked against the windows. "They point to the woman. They say your attention has been divided when it should have been focused entirely on the conflict with the Ricci's." Dominic's expression remained unreadable, though something tightened behind his eyes. "And what do you believe, Marcus?" "I believe," Marcus said carefully, "that a leader who inspires this kind of loyalty, the kind that leads someone to step in front of harm meant for him, is not a weak leader. I believe the ones questioning you are simply looking for an excuse to challenge your position, and they would have found one, regardless of what happened with Elena." Dominic considered this for a long moment, staring out at the rain-soaked city beyond his window. "Give me names. I want to know exactly who is spreading these doubts." "Already compiled," Marcus said, sliding a folder across the desk. As Dominic reviewed the list, he felt the familiar weight of his position settling back over his shoulders, a reminder that the brief peace he had found sitting beside Elena's hospital bed could not last indefinitely. The world he lived in demanded constant vigilance, constant strength, and any perceived weakness would be exploited by those eager to seize power for themselves. He resolved in that moment to address the doubts directly rather than allowing them to fester. The following week, he called a meeting of his senior advisors, the very people whose loyalty had been quietly questioned by Marcus's investigation. He stood before them, composed and unflinching, and addressed the incident at the Golden Fern without hesitation or excuse. "Some of you believe I have grown distracted," he said, his voice carrying the same calm authority that had defined his leadership since he first inherited his position. "Let me be clear. The woman who stepped in front of harm meant for me did so out of her own choice, understanding the danger involved. That choice does not reflect weakness on my part. It reflects the kind of loyalty this organization should aspire to inspire in everyone who works within it." The room remained silent, several of the older advisors exchanging uncertain glances. "As for the Ricci's," Dominic continued, "their attempt has already been answered. Those who orchestrated the attack will not trouble us again, and any among you who believes there is opportunity in doubting my leadership should reconsider that belief carefully, because I will not tolerate division within this organization while an external threat remains active." His words carried the intended effect. The quiet murmurs of doubt that had begun circulating among his men faded, replaced by a renewed understanding that Dominic Marchetti remained firmly in control, regardless of the personal complications that had emerged from the attack. But privately, away from the eyes of his organization, Dominic continued to wrestle with questions that had nothing to do with power or leadership. He visited Elena often during this period, and their conversations gradually shifted away from the danger surrounding them and towards simpler, more personal territory. He learned about her childhood, about the father whose debts had led her into this world in the first place, about her dreams of eventually opening her own small accounting practice, far removed from restaurants and hidden ledgers and men who disappeared into back offices to discuss things she was never meant to hear. Elena, in turn, learned more about the man behind the reputation that had once intimidated her so completely. She learned that Dominic had lost his mother young, that his relationship with his father had been strained by the expectations placed upon him from an early age, that he had never truly had the chance to decide for himself what kind of life he wanted to lead. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked him one evening, as they sat together in the small garden behind her townhouse, the city lights glowing faintly in the distance. "The life you were given?" Dominic considered the question seriously, as he considered most things. "I used to. There were years when I resented every part of it. The responsibility, the danger, the constant awareness that any misstep could cost lives, including my own." He paused, glancing at her. "Lately, I find myself thinking less about what I have lost and more about what I still might gain." Elena felt her heart quicken slightly at the weight behind his words, though neither of them spoke further on the matter that evening. The following weeks brought a fragile kind of peace. The Ricci's, having lost several key members involved in the failed attack, retreated into a period of uncharacteristic quiet, either regrouping for a future attempt or reconsidering the wisdom of continuing their conflict with an organization that had responded so decisively to their aggression. Dominic's own organization stabilized under his renewed show of strength, the whispers of doubt fading into memory. Elena, meanwhile, continued her recovery, both physically and in the quieter, more personal sense. She began accompanying Dominic to occasional business functions, carefully positioned as a financial consultant rather than anything more personal, though anyone paying close attention could sense the shift in how he looked at her during these events, a warmth that had not existed before the incident at the Golden Fern. Grace, who had initially maintained a professional distance from Elena, gradually warmed toward her as well, recognizing something genuine in the bond forming between her employer and the woman who had saved his life. "He has never been like this with anyone," Grace confided to Elena one afternoon, as they reviewed logistics for an upcoming event Dominic was scheduled to attend. "Careful, yes, strategic, always, but never like this." "Like what?" Elena asked, genuinely curious. Grace considered the question. "Present, fully present, in a way that has nothing to do with calculation or advantage. It is rare, in this world, to see someone let their guard down that completely." Elena did not know how to respond, though the observation settled warmly in her chest, a confirmation of something she had begun to suspect but had not yet allowed herself to fully acknowledge. Despite the fragile peace, Danger remained an undercurrent beneath every aspect of their lives. Marcus continued monitoring the Ricci's movements closely, aware that their retreat could easily be a temporary strategy, rather than genuine surrender. Dominic maintained heightened security around Elena's townhouse, unwilling to risk a repeat of the attack that had so nearly cost her life. That caution proved justified one evening, nearly a month after Elena's discharge from the medical facility, when Marcus arrived at Dominic's office with news that shattered the fragile calm they had all grown accustomed to. "We have confirmation," Marcus said, his expression grim. "The Ricci's are planning something larger. Not another attempt on your life directly, but something aimed at destabilizing everything you have built. They intend to strike at the businesses under your protection, the people who depend on your organization for their livelihoods." Dominic's jaw tightened. "When?" "Within the week, based on the intelligence we have gathered." "And Elena?" Marcus hesitated, choosing his next words carefully. "There is reason to believe they are aware of her connection to you. Whether they intend to use that connection against you directly remains unclear, but the risk cannot be dismissed." The color drained slightly from Dominic's face, though his composure remained outwardly intact. He had spent weeks convincing himself that the danger surrounding Elena had passed, that the quiet peace they had built together in her small garden and during their careful evening conversations represented something stable, something he could protect indefinitely. Marcus's words shattered that illusion completely. "I want additional security placed around her immediately," Dominic said, his voice sharp with an urgency that left no room for negotiation. "And I want to know everything about this planned attack, every detail, before they have the chance to act." "Already in motion," Marcus confirmed. "But Dominic, there is something else you should consider." "What is it?" Marcus met his employer's gaze directly, a rare moment of personal candor breaking through their typically professional relationship. "You cannot protect her indefinitely while she remains connected to this world. The Ricci's, and any future threats that emerge after them, will always see her as a way to reach you, as long as she remains close to your life. If you truly care for her safety, you may need to consider what that means for both of your futures." The words landed heavily, striking at a fear Dominic had been quietly avoiding for weeks. He had allowed himself to imagine a future that included Elena, a future where the dangers of his world somehow remained separate from the growing bond between them. Marcus's blunt assessment forced him to confront the reality he had been reluctant to face. That night, after ensuring additional security had been deployed around Elena's townhouse, Dominic sat alone in his office, long after everyone else had gone home, staring at the same rain-streaked window that had witnessed so many of his difficult decisions over the years. He thought about the choice in front of him. He could continue as he had, keeping Elena close, accepting the ongoing risk that her connection to him represented, or he could do what Marcus had suggested, create distance between them for her own protection, even if it meant sacrificing the fragile happiness they had begun building together. Neither option felt acceptable, and yet one of them would eventually have to be chosen. He arrived at Elena's townhouse the following morning, earlier than usual, his expression carrying a weight she immediately recognized as significant. "Something has happened," she said, before he had even fully stepped through the door. He explained the situation carefully, the planned attack on his businesses, the possibility that the Ricci's were aware of her connection to him, the danger that now extended beyond the walls of the Golden Fern and into every corner of her life. Elena listened without interrupting, her expression steady despite the fear that flickered briefly behind her eyes. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he had told her. "What do you want to do?" she asked finally. "I do not know," he admitted, a rare confession of uncertainty from a man who had spent his entire career projecting unwavering confidence. "Marcus believes I should create distance between us, for your protection. Part of me believes he is right." "And what do you believe?" Dominic met her eyes directly. "I believe that walking away from you now would be the first genuine mistake I have made in a very long time. But I also cannot bear the thought of you being harmed again because of your connection to me." Elena stepped closer, closing the distance between them, until she stood directly in front of him. "You do not get to make this decision alone, Dominic. I chose to step in front of that danger for you. I understood the risk when I did it, and I understand the risk now. If you truly want to protect me, the answer is not to disappear from my life. The answer is to face whatever comes next together. Her words settled over him like a weight lifting, rather than a burden added, a clarity he had been searching for, without realizing exactly what he needed to hear. The Ricci's will not stop easily, he said quietly. This will not be simple, or safe. I never expected it to be, Elena replied, but I would rather face danger standing beside you, than safety standing apart from you. Dominic studied her for a long moment, something resolving fully behind his eyes, a decision made not out of calculation or strategy, but out of a certainty that had been building steadily since the moment she had stepped between him and harm in that private dining room weeks earlier. Then we face it together, he said, whatever comes next. Outside, the city continued its ordinary rhythm, unaware of the quiet conversation, reshaping the futures of two people who had never expected to find each other, let alone choose to remain together. In the face of danger, neither of them could fully predict or control. But within the walls of that small townhouse, a decision had been made, one that would carry them both into the most dangerous chapter of their story yet. The week that followed tested every ounce of preparation Dominic's organization could muster. Marcus coordinated a network of trusted associates across the city, watching every business, every warehouse, every location connected to Dominic's operations. For any sign of the planned strike, the Ricci's were preparing. Grace managed communications between the various teams with practiced efficiency, ensuring that information flowed quickly and accurately, without the delays that could prove costly in a situation this volatile. Elena, despite the danger surrounding her, refused to remain passive during this period. Her background in finance proved unexpectedly valuable, as she began reviewing patterns in the Ricci's known business dealings, searching for irregularities that might reveal the timing or location of their planned attack. Dominic had been hesitant at first to involve her so directly, but her insight quickly proved too valuable to dismiss. Here, Elena said one evening, spreading a set of documents across the table in Dominic's office. 3 of their shell companies have moved unusually large amounts of money through accounts linked to a shipping company on the east side of the city. If they are planning to disrupt your businesses, I believe this is where they intend to start. Dominic studied the documents carefully, impressed despite the tension of the moment. You found this from financial records alone? Numbers do not lie, Elena said. People hide behind reputation and intimidation, but money always leaves a trail, if you know how to read it. Marcus, standing nearby, exchanged a glance with Dominic that carried unspoken respect. She may have just given us the advantage we needed. Armed with this information, Dominic's organization began quietly repositioning its resources, strengthening security around the shipping company Elena had identified, while maintaining the appearance of normal operations elsewhere, hoping to avoid tipping off the Ricci's that their plan had been discovered. The following days passed with agonizing tension. Elena remained at Dominic's side more often than not, partly for her own safety, and partly because both of them had come to rely on each other's presence during moments of uncertainty. Their relationship, forged initially through crisis, continued deepening through the shared weight of this new danger, conversations stretching late into the night as they reviewed strategy, discussed contingencies, and occasionally allowed themselves brief moments of quiet connection amid the constant tension. You do not have to stay for all of this, Dominic told her one night, as they sat together reviewing security reports well past midnight. You have already done more than anyone could reasonably ask. I am not doing this because you asked me to, Elena replied. I am doing this because I choose to be here. He studied her for a long moment, something soft crossing his typically guarded expression. I am not certain I deserve someone like you in my life. That is not for you to decide alone, she said, echoing words she had spoken to him once before. That choice belongs to me as much as it belongs to you. 6 days after Marcus first delivered news of the planned attack, the Ricci's made their move. It happened not at the shipping company Elena had identified, but at a second location, a smaller warehouse that Dominic's organization had deliberately left with lighter security, hoping to draw attention away from their primary point of concern. The strategy worked better than anticipated. A team of Ricci operatives arrived under cover of darkness, intending to disrupt operations and send a clear message about the consequences of continued resistance. They found Marcus and a team of Dominic's most trusted men waiting for them instead. The confrontation that followed was swift and decisive, resolved within minutes as Marcus's team, forewarned and fully prepared, neutralized the threat before any significant damage could occur. Several Ricci operatives were detained, providing valuable information about the broader scope of their organization's remaining resources and intentions. Word reached Dominic within the hour, delivered by Marcus himself, who arrived at the townhouse where Elena and Dominic had been anxiously awaiting news throughout the evening. "It is done," Marcus said, his expression carrying the particular exhaustion that came after a crisis successfully managed. "They walked directly into the trap we prepared. No losses on our side, and we now hold information that should significantly weaken their remaining operations." Relief flooded through the room, though Dominic's expression remained carefully measured, aware that one successful defense did not guarantee the conflict was truly finished. "What of their leadership?" he asked. "Has this weakened their resolve, or will they simply attempt something else?" Marcus hesitated slightly before answering. "Based on what we have learned from those detained tonight, the Ricci's remaining leadership is fractured. Several of their senior members had already expressed doubts about continuing this conflict, viewing it as an unnecessary risk with diminishing returns. Tonight's failure may be the final push needed to convince them to stand down entirely." Elena, listening quietly from where she sat beside Dominic, felt a cautious relief settle over her, though she remained aware that such conflicts rarely ended cleanly or immediately. Still, the news represented genuine progress, a sign that the danger surrounding them might finally begin to recede. In the days that followed, this cautious optimism proved justified. Whispers began circulating throughout the city's underground network that the Ricci's, weakened by their failed operations and increasingly divided leadership, were quietly seeking terms for a genuine resolution to the conflict, one that did not involve further confrontation. Dominic approached these negotiations carefully, unwilling to trust easily after the betrayal of the previous peace attempt that had nearly cost him his life. He insisted on meeting only in carefully controlled circumstances, with security measures far exceeding anything used during the earlier, failed negotiation. Elena, though not directly involved in these discussions, remained close throughout the process, offering financial analysis that helped verify the sincerity of the Ricci's claims about their weakened position, cross-referencing their reported losses against patterns she had observed in their financial records. "Their numbers align with what they are claiming," she confirmed to Dominic, after reviewing the latest information Marcus had gathered. "They genuinely do not have the resources to sustain further conflict. This appears to be a legitimate attempt at resolution, not another trap." Armed with this confirmation, Dominic proceeded with cautious confidence, and within 2 weeks, a genuine agreement was reached between the two organizations, one that redefined territorial boundaries and established clear consequences for any future violations. The conflict that had defined months of tension, danger, and loss finally reached its conclusion, not through further confrontation, but through a negotiated peace built on verified strength rather than false promises. With the immediate danger resolved, Dominic found himself facing a different kind of uncertainty, one that had nothing to do with rival organizations or territorial disputes, and everything to do with the woman who had become inseparable from his life over the past several months. He had spent years avoiding personal attachments, understanding the vulnerability they represented in a world built on danger and betrayal. Elena had shattered that careful isolation completely, first through an act of selfless courage that had nearly cost her life, and then through months of quiet strength, insight, and unwavering presence during the most dangerous period of his career. He found her one evening in the small garden behind her townhouse, the same place where they had shared so many of their most honest conversations over the preceding months. The tension that had defined their lives for so long had finally begun to ease, replaced by a quiet, unfamiliar sense of stability. "The agreement with the Ricci's has been finalized," he told her, settling into the seat beside hers. "The conflict is genuinely over, for now." "That is good news," Elena said, though something cautious lingered in her voice. "What happens now?" Dominic considered the question carefully, aware that it carried far more weight than its simple phrasing suggested. "I have spent the past several months thinking about very little beyond survival and strategy. For the first time in a long while, I find myself thinking about what comes after." "And what does come after?" He turned to face her fully, his expression carrying a vulnerability she had rarely seen from him, even during their most difficult moments together. "I do not know exactly. But I know that whatever it looks like, I do not want to face it without you. Elena felt her breath catch slightly, though she had begun to anticipate this conversation for weeks, watching the careful walls Dominic had built around himself gradually dissolve in her presence. You once offered me a way out of this world entirely, she said quietly. Money, protection, a chance to disappear and build an ordinary life, far from everything connected to you. I remember, Dominic said. I still believe you deserve that option, if it is what you truly want. And if it is not what I want. He studied her carefully, hope and uncertainty mixing behind his composed expression. Then I would consider myself fortunate beyond anything I believed I deserved. Elena reached for his hand, the same hand that had gripped hers so tightly during those terrifying moments in the hospital, the same hand that had guided her through months of danger and uncertainty that followed. I did not step in front of that danger because I was thinking clearly about consequences, Dominic. I did it because some part of me already understood what you meant to me, even before I was ready to admit it fully to myself. The words settled between them, honest and unguarded, a culmination of months spent building trust through crisis, honesty, and quiet moments of connection that had gradually transformed a professional relationship into something neither of them had anticipated, but both had come to cherish deeply. Yet even as this personal resolution began taking shape, Elena understood that choosing to remain in Dominic's life meant choosing to remain connected to a world that would always carry inherent danger, regardless of how thoroughly any single conflict had been resolved. The peace with the Riccis represented genuine progress, but it did not erase the fundamental reality of the life Dominic led, a life built on careful balances of power that could shift again at any moment. She would need to decide, clearly and deliberately, whether she was prepared to accept that reality permanently, not swept along by the momentum of crisis and recovery, but through a conscious choice made with full understanding of everything it would require. That decision, she knew, would shape not only her own future, but the future of the man sitting beside her, a man who had spent his entire life believing that vulnerability and connection were luxuries he could not afford, until a single unthinking act of courage had proven him wrong. 3 months passed before Elena made her decision known, not because she remained uncertain, but because she wanted to be absolutely sure that her choice came from clarity, rather than the lingering emotional intensity of everything they had survived together. During those 3 months, life settled into a rhythm neither of them had expected to find. The peace with the Riccis held steady, tested occasionally by minor disputes, but never escalating into the kind of danger that had defined their earlier months together. Dominic's organization stabilized fully under his renewed leadership, the doubts that had briefly circulated among his advisors fading into distant memory, replaced by a deeper respect for a leader who had proven both his strength and his capacity for genuine loyalty. Elena, meanwhile, began building something entirely her own, using the resources Dominic had offered, not as an obligation but as genuine support for whatever path she chose. She established a small accounting practice, one built on legitimate work, transparent numbers, and clients who had no connection to the world of hidden ledgers and back-office negotiations that had first brought her into Dominic's life. Caleb, still unaware of the full truth behind his sister's recovery months earlier, noticed the changes in her with growing curiosity. She seemed different, steadier, carrying herself with a confidence that had not existed before the accident she still believed had led to her lengthy recovery. "You seem happy," he told her one evening, during a dinner she had arranged specifically to finally share the truth with him. "Whatever happened these past months, it changed you. For the better, I think." Elena took a deep breath, understanding that the moment had finally arrived to be honest with her brother about everything she had experienced. She explained carefully, choosing her words with precision, the truth about her time at the Golden Fern, the danger that had led to her injury, and the man who had become inseparable from her life in the months that followed. Caleb listened with a mixture of shock and concern, his protective instincts as her younger brother immediately surfacing. "Elena, this sounds incredibly dangerous. Are you certain this is what you want?" "I understand the concern," Elena said gently. "I had the same questions myself, many times over these past months, but I have made this choice with clear eyes, understanding exactly what it means, and exactly what risks remain possible. Dominic is not the man his reputation suggests, not entirely, He has shown me a version of himself that few people ever see, someone who values loyalty and honesty above the power and fear that define his public reputation. Caleb remained quiet for a long moment, processing everything his sister had shared. "I want to meet him," he said finally. "If this is truly what you want, I need to understand for myself who this man is." The meeting between Caleb and Dominic took place the following week, a carefully arranged dinner that carried more weight than either man initially expected. Dominic, despite his years of experience navigating dangerous negotiations and difficult conversations, found himself unexpectedly nervous, facing the protective scrutiny of Elena's younger brother. "I understand you have concerns," Dominic said, once the initial pleasantries had passed and the conversation shifted toward more serious territory. "You would be right to have them. The world I come from carries real danger, and your sister has already paid a steep price for her connection to it." "That is exactly my concern," Caleb replied directly, his tone respectful but unflinching. "What guarantee do I have that this will not happen again?" Dominic considered the question seriously, understanding that a dismissive answer would only deepen Caleb's doubts. "I cannot offer you a guarantee that danger will never touch her life again. Not honestly. What I can offer is my complete commitment to protecting her, to ensuring that whatever risks remain are minimized as thoroughly as possible, and to building a life alongside her that values her safety and happiness above everything else." Caleb studied him carefully, searching for any sign of insincerity in his answer. Finding none, he allowed himself a small, cautious nod. "My sister is the most important person in my life. If she trusts you, and if you are genuinely committed to what you have just told me, then I am willing to trust that judgment." The dinner continued more comfortably after that exchange, tension gradually easing as Caleb began to see, in small moments and careful observations, the genuine connection between his sister and the man she had chosen to build a future alongside. As spring gave way to early summer, Elena finally shared her decision fully with Dominic, choosing a quiet evening in the same garden where so many of their most important conversations had taken place. "I have thought carefully about everything," she told him, as they sat together beneath a sky beginning to darken with the approach of evening. "About the world you live in, about the risks that will always remain possible, about the life I could have chosen instead, far away from any of this." Dominic waited, his expression carrying the same vulnerability she had come to recognize as genuine rather than calculated. "And I choose this," she continued, "not because circumstances forced me into it, and not because gratitude or obligation binds me to a decision I do not truly want. I choose this because somewhere between that moment I stepped between you and danger, and every conversation, every quiet evening, every difficult decision we have faced together since, I found something I am not willing to walk away from. Relief and something deeper, something that looked remarkably like joy, spread across Dominic's typically guarded expression. You understand what this means. The life you would be choosing alongside me will never be entirely free of danger. I understand, Elena said. I made that choice once already, in a single unthinking heartbeat, without fully understanding what it would mean. This time, I am choosing it with complete clarity, fully aware of everything it requires. Dominic reached for her hand, the same gesture that had anchored her through the darkest moments of her recovery months earlier, though this time it carried none of the desperate fear that had defined it then. This time, it carried something steadier, something built on months of trust rather than crisis. I spent years believing that connection like this was a weakness I could not afford, he said quietly. You have shown me, through everything we have survived together, that it is not a weakness at all. It is perhaps the greatest strength either of us could hope to build. The following months brought continued stability to both their personal lives and the broader world Dominic navigated as the head of his organization. The peace with the Riccis held firm, gradually solidifying into a genuine, if cautious, working relationship between the two families. Elena's accounting practice grew steadily, built entirely on legitimate work and a reputation for precision and integrity that had nothing to do with the dangerous world she remained connected to through her relationship with Dominic. Marcus and Grace, who had watched the relationship develop from its earliest, most uncertain moments, found themselves genuinely pleased by the transformation they witnessed in their employer, a man who had spent years projecting careful, calculated strength, now allowing himself moments of authentic happiness, without fear of the vulnerability it represented. I never expected to see him like this, Grace admitted to Elena one afternoon, as they reviewed logistics for an upcoming gathering Dominic had planned, one that carried a significance neither Grace nor Marcus had directly acknowledged, but both clearly understood. Whatever you did, whatever choice you made that night at the Golden Fern, it changed everything, not just for him, but for everyone around him. Elena considered this observation carefully, thinking back to that single unthinking moment months earlier, the flicker of movement near the kitchen door, the instinct that had driven her forward without any conscious calculation of risk or consequence. I did not know, in that moment, what it would lead to, she admitted. I only knew I could not let what was about to happen. Sometimes, Grace said, the most important decisions in life are made exactly that way, not through careful calculation, but through instinct, through some deeper understanding of what truly matters, arriving faster than conscious thought ever could. That evening, Dominic arrived at Elena's townhouse carrying a small, carefully wrapped box, his expression carrying a nervousness she had rarely witnessed from him, even during the most dangerous moments of the conflict they had survived together. I have spent months thinking about how to properly express what you mean to me, he said, sitting beside her in the garden that had witnessed so many of their most important conversations. Words have never come easily to me, not in matters like this. But I wanted you to have something that represents the choice we have both made, deliberately and clearly, to build a future together. He opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring that caught the fading evening light. Elena felt tears gather in her eyes, though they carried none of the fear or uncertainty that had defined so much of their journey together. These were tears of genuine joy, a recognition of everything they had survived and everything they had chosen to build together, deliberately, and with full understanding of what it required. Dominic, she said softly, are you asking me what I think you are asking? I am, he confirmed, his composed exterior finally giving way completely to open, unguarded emotion. I am asking you to build a future with me, fully and completely, understanding everything that future might require, and choosing it anyway, together. Elena reached for his hand, the same hand that had held hers through fear, through recovery, through danger, and through the slow, steady process of building genuine trust and connection between two people who had never expected to find each other. Yes, she said simply, the single word carrying the weight of everything they had survived together, and everything still to come, every part of it, together. As the evening settled fully into night, the city lights glowing steadily in the distance, Elena understood that the choice she had made in a single unthinking heartbeat months earlier had led her to exactly this moment, a future built not on fear or obligation, but on genuine, deliberate love, chosen fully and completely by two people who had faced danger together and emerged, on the other side, stronger and more certain of what truly mattered than either of them had ever believed possible. The bullet that had once threatened to end everything had instead become the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted, a life built on courage, loyalty, and a connection strong enough to withstand whatever challenges still lay ahead.